It's the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable Year in Review from the Ohio State House edition from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre. Thank you so much for joining us, and Happy New Year to you. Today, we're looking back at the top stories from the State House in 2025, as well as some of the stories covered by the Ohio Newsroom in parts of the state that don't often make it into the headlines. We recorded this show in December, so if big news broke over the holidays, we won't have it in this retrospective. But we have plenty to discuss from throughout the year. Property taxes were a high priority. Property owners are fed up with their rising bills, and lawmakers scrambled to pass reforms aimed at saving them money. But an effort to repeal property taxes with a ballot measure grinds on, and schools and local governments warn that could be a death knell. Senate Bill 1, which targets diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts on college campuses, among other things, has forced big changes already. The new state budget flattens the income tax, cuts gender-affirming mental health care, and limits the kinds of levies local school districts can ask voters to approve. And subsidies for coal-fired power plants, a vestige of scandal-plagued House Bill 6, were eliminated in a massive energy bill. And those quirky stories all across Ohio, we're going to talk about those too. Did you know that Dayton is the funk capital of America and that an airship disaster is part of the DNA of a Noble County town? Joining me to discuss those and other big statewide stories from the Ohio Public Radio and Television State House News Bureau in Columbus, reporters Joe Ingles and Sarah Donaldson. Hey there.
Hello.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to see both of you. And in studio with me, what a treat, because usually you're not, is a woman who could probably spend an hour talking about next year's news before it even happens. She's that good. Bureau Chief Karen Kassler. Hey, Karen.
It's great to be here. Great to be seen.
Good to have you with us as well. Later in the show, the Ohio Newsroom's managing editor Claire Roth will join me. For now, let's get ready to roundtable. When we look back over the roundtable shows from last year, it was abundantly clear that one topic was prioritized above all others: property taxes. Property owners are howling as their property values and their taxes keep going up. And the howls are loud enough for legislators to hear. They passed a number of measures aimed at providing property tax relief and say it'll result in a $2 billion savings. But a grassroots effort to eliminate property taxes persists with a goal of qualifying a constitutional amendment for the 2026 ballot. Local governments and schools say that would be devastating. Karen, there's been a lot of recommendations and proposals in Columbus as we turn the page to the new year. What actual property tax changes have been approved?
I think that's really a big part of this story. Is we started out the year with a report from the joint committee that was set up in the previous General Assembly. Then we had Governor Mike DeWine, when he vetoed 4 property tax related items in the budget, he set up a task force. So we ended up with a whole bunch of recommendations, and very few of them actually moved forward, especially 2 that have come up in both of those, which are a circuit breaker, which would lower taxes based on you hit a certain level of income, and then, or percentage of your income, and then also expansion of the homestead tax exemption. Those 2 things have not passed, though they were recommendations. What has passed are things that Republicans have talked about being just huge modernization of the property tax system. And they have other bills. There's like 50 bills that could address property tax related law in some way. But Democrats have pointed out that they really don't do much in terms of actually lowering the number that you're seeing when you go to pay your property taxes. So I think that not only was that a big story in 2025, it'll be an even bigger story in 2026.
So the property taxes are something that the taxpayers are fed up with. However, they fund a whole lot of things.
Everything that you can think of at the local level. And that's part of why this effort that you referenced about abolishing the property taxes, which would, if this all volunteer group gets its signatures together and gets to the ballot next in November of 2026, that is, when you've got local governments looking at that, is potentially chaotic, because no other state has done this. You've got everything from schools to police, fire, libraries, zoos, children's services, all these things that are funded by property taxes at the local level. $16.7 billion in property taxes were collected statewide in 2024. That's a lot of money to try to replace with a sales tax or something else.
One of the measures, Sarah, involves what local schools and governments can ask residents to approve at the ballot in terms of a levy. There's a ton of different ways levies can be approved. So does this streamline it? Is that what the argument is?
That's the argument that Republicans at the State House have made, because, you have a camp of Republicans who say, well, we're at the state level, we don't really control whether a subdivision goes in front of its voters and asks if they want to raise their property taxes. But they say that the system's confusing. You know, subdivisions and schools can levy taxes in more than one way, at a fixed rate, at a fixed sum, for debt service. So one thing that lawmakers really wanted to get rid of are replacement levies. So there are replacement levies and renewal levies. The difference between them is whether you're being taxed at the value of your property when that levy was first issued. Replacement levies have some hidden increases, Republican lawmakers say, because they're taxing you based on the most recent value of your property.
So that replacement levies, renewals, or substitute emergency levies, those are things that are not necessarily renewals, but replacements and substitute emergency levies. Those would be off the table. What would be off the table would be all property taxes if the grassroots group trying to make that happen succeeds. Let's talk about their effort now for a moment, Sarah. That's something that the lawmakers, even the ones that are passing all of these reforms, are, it seems, deathly afraid of.
Yeah, I definitely think they're afraid of it, especially because when you look down the pipeline, you know, Governor McDewine has 1 year left. There's going to be a new governor in town if it's Vivek Ramaswamy. He's talked extensively about wanting to eliminate the income tax. But, you know, property taxes, like you've said already, fund so many different local services. And so I think it would create a real crisis in local budgets. And of course, you know, the state kicks money back to locals, but there's been a lot of complaints that they're not kicking enough money back to locals. So I think it's a real conundrum for lawmakers. You know, I asked Republican Speaker Matt Huffman if he would, you know, kind of campaign against this, if it actually makes the ballot, which of course there are some questions if it will get that far, because it's really hard to make the ballot. But I think you're going to see a pretty large cohort of lawmakers, local officials, police departments, teachers, all of these people are going to be against eliminating property taxes.
And Joe, if that does make it, if they gather the signatures that are necessary for it, does it then become a central point in the governor's race, or do both candidates kind of both oppose it as it's being presented?
Well, I would say it's already a central point in the governor's race, regardless of what happens to that. But yes, if that makes it to the ballot, it is going to be big. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, though, about what happens, how do you replace that revenue? It's a lot of revenue.
Right. And Karen, we've seen over the years where the community of Ohioans has gone to the ballot and done something opposite of what the legislature would want to do. It happened with abortion rights. It happened with marijuana legalization. So
Casinos.
There's right, and then so maybe there's no reason to think that this wouldn't happen, even though all of these officials don't want it to.
Well, I have to say that an all-volunteer effort with no paid signature gatherers, getting 443,000 valid signatures, which is actually, it's 442,958 valid signatures.
Okay. Exactly.
Exactly. You'd have to gather much more than that. To get to that level by the beginning of July is a tall order. It's really, really difficult. And so I think that's the first hurdle that this group has to pass. They say that they're going forward no matter what the legislature does in terms of property tax relief or changing laws or whatever. They are committed to going through this. I think a lot of them feel that they haven't been heard by lawmakers, and they're really, really frustrated, and that's why they want to see this go forward. But I just don't know if it has what is needed to get to the ballot, and then if it got to the ballot, we're already seeing lawmakers talking about how this would be devastating to services that you count on at the local level. I mean, it would be an unprecedented pushback against that.
And local officials.
Oh, absolutely. You'd have officials at every level. In fact, late in 2025, I moderated a discussion before the County Commissioners Association with the folks from the abolishment effort. County commissioners in Ohio are 90% Republican, and they're very concerned and largely opposed to this because of how important property taxes are to funding local services.
Sarah mentioned that Vivek Ramaswamy was talking about wanting to get rid of the income tax. If you got rid of the income tax and you got rid of the property tax, does anyone have an idea about how you would fund these things? Will I essentially be paving my own roads and putting out my own fires?
Well, and that's been, I think, the question of how do you replace that? I mean, I've seen estimates of a statewide sales tax going into the high teens, you know, which would be devastating to communities that are on the border, Cleveland, Cincinnati, where people could easily go to another state to buy the things that they need. Maybe not Cleveland, but you know what I'm talking
you can
about.
swim for a few miles, go to another country.
I think, then you start talking too about raising fees and raising all these other things. If you think that lowering or eliminating property taxes will lower all your costs and you won't have to pay that, well, then that means you won't have those local services. Those local services cost money, and that money would have to be gathered somehow.
Right.
And a sales tax is the most regressive tax there is. It hits lower income people harder than any other tax that is out there. So it's a real discussion.
Sarah, were you trying to jump in there too?
Oh my gosh, yes. But all I was going to say is, in addition to the sales tax, locals can levy income taxes. And you've seen some schools like Westerville and Columbus, try that approach. So it would be interesting to see if local income taxes, I mean, again, obviously the devil would be in the details with eliminating the statewide income tax, but that's another revenue, a place to gather revenue for locals.
Okay, we only have 1,000 more items to discuss, so let's move on. Senate Bill 1, a higher education overhaul that targets what supporters call liberal bias on college campuses, went into effect in June. The bill, whose main architect is Senator Jerry Serino of Kirtland, targets most diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on campuses and bans faculty strikes, among other measures. Sarah, there'd been a grassroots effort there, too, to overturn SB 1, but that fizzled out. Why?
Yeah, so unionized faculty at Youngstown State University, all volunteers were gathering signatures for a repeal effort, but it was a really quick turnaround, and ultimately they just said they weren't going to be able to get enough signatures to get it on the ballot, because if they got it on the ballot, then the law would have paused. But, it had a 90-day turnaround between when the bill was signed and when it went into effect, and they just weren't able to get the signatures they needed.
And it did get signed, Joe, by Governor DeWine. There was a big push to urge him to veto it. He didn't have ears for that.
Yeah, opponents of the bill had urged the governor to veto it. They said it was going to cause all kinds of problems in every aspect, not just the things that are taught in the classroom, but, things like sororities, fraternities, clubs, things on campus, and that it would actually hurt a lot of students who need a lot of services because it would take those services away. And the other thing is, we've got to remember the language in that is vague. So there's a lot of interpretation going on there, and that's another problem.
I know, Karen, that a lot of campuses, and we've done reporting on this, have gotten rid of organizations, LGBTQ organizations and others that catered to certain groups, essentially to get away from this DEI label. But do we have any evidence of the kinds of disaster that people said would befall colleges as a result of this coming into effect in June?
Well, it's only been in effect for 6 months. Mm-hmm. So I think the long-term effect is what we have to look at. But there were those who were opposed to it who have pointed out that there's been almost a over-compliance by some colleges and universities, and they specifically single out Ohio State as the big one. Ohio State shut its DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion office even before Senate Bill 1 took effect. They closed that in February. They've banned things like chalking, drawing, putting messages in chalk on campus. That was not technically related to Senate Bill 1, but people have questioned whether those messages could have been part, and trying to stop some of those messages could have been part of that. RAs can now only decorate common spaces with Ohio State spirit themes. So, these are the kind of things that we're starting to see in campuses around the state. But whether it actually does result in lower enrollments, we have seen a little bit of a fall off at Ohio State. But what could that be? That could be related to a lot of things. It's time will tell.
I saw a report recently where nationwide, Ohio ranked something like 8th for number of, it wasn't necessarily applications, but people that were looking for colleges in the various states. And so it said, okay, the interest was high. It was like in the top 10. So it didn't seem to be this chilling effect on people being interested in going to colleges, state colleges in Ohio.
And I think that's the kind of thing that we have to look at, but we also have to look at things like cost and things like that would potentially keep people from seeking other educational opportunities rather than college.
What about curriculum? How has that been affected?
I know that there have been some programs that have been shut down. I mean, the University of Toledo, for example, cut 9 undergraduate majors from Africana Studies to philosophy. So those programs, that's part of Senate Bill 1, not only because of the whole intellectual diversity idea, but also it allowed some colleges and universities to cut programs that they felt were not giving students the best opportunity to go out and get a job. And so this is a sweeping piece of legislation that I think we're going to be seeing the effects of for quite some time.
Okay, let's go back behind the garage now and talk about weed. Legal marijuana will be more highly regulated, and intoxicating hemp, like the kind sold in corner gas stores and gas stations and stores, will be banned after the legislature late in 2025 addressed those issues. Voters approved recreational marijuana in 2023 in a statute, not a constitutional amendment, and that allows lawmakers then to make changes. Sarah, took a lot of stops and starts by lawmakers. They've been talking about this for 2 years. They finally did enact some regulations. What did they finally agree upon and send to the governor?
Yeah, so on the hemp piece, we're talking about, Delta-8 THC, hemp-derived beverages, all of that, that you, like you said, is sold unregulated in a lot of different stores. Hemp will be under a 90-day. It will be banned within 90 days of the governor's signature. Those beverages get a little more leeway. Theirs is more in line with the federal ban that Congress passed in the last month or so. As for marijuana, one of the big pieces here is there's been this pot of money that's just been kind of piling up for local communities that have dispensaries. So when Issue 2 was passed, that's the voter-initiated statute, 36% of the tax revenue was meant to go to local communities that said, sure, a dispensary can come to town. Lawmakers kind of held on to that piece as a bargaining piece. Now $80 million worth of tax revenue over the next 2 fiscal years will be distributed through that host community cannabis fund. Democrats in both chambers took issue with the final version of this bill recriminalizing marijuana possession in certain instances. So it's, now a state crime for edibles to be stored outside of their original packaging. If you're transporting marijuana, legally bought marijuana, it has to be in the original packaging. And there's a lot of jokes about that state up north and its marijuana, but it is now not only a federal crime to buy marijuana in Michigan and transport it across state lines, it's also a state crime.
Joe, Ohio marked its first full year this year, actually in 2025, of recreational marijuana sales. So how did it go?
Well, there's nothing to compare it to because it's the first full year. But if you look at the sales, there were more than $702 million. That's new revenue that's coming into the state because it wasn't there before. They sold 109,706 pounds of marijuana from August 2024 to August 2025. All that new revenue, I think state leaders would say is great. How does it compare to other states? Well, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, but if you started a product and said, I'll sell $700 million worth of this, I'll sell 109,706 pounds from August of 2024 to August of 2025, I'd say, let's start that product.
And Joe's point, though, there about how we don't have anything to compare it to other than, illegal sales and who was tracking all that. But I think it's significant that lawmakers have made the effort to move that money, some of that money back to local communities because they said they were host communities for dispensaries. They've been waiting on that money. And so I think, it's been sitting there since sales started. So that's a big deal, a big part of this.
And Karen, that $700 million comes even though the state doesn't really push its marijuana product. You don't see that. Quite the opposite. In fact, we talk about our neighbor to the north, and everyone says, "Hey, you should go there." But here, you can't even put it on a billboard now.
Right, and they actually tried to stop people from bringing marijuana into Ohio from other states. Lawmakers have been pretty clear, Republican lawmakers in particular have been pretty clear that they do not like the legalization of marijuana. They were opposed to the issue that legalized it in 2023, so it's not a huge surprise. In fact, if you recall the rollout of the medical marijuana program, it was very slow and very deliberate because there was a concern about kids and that kind of stuff. And so this has been kind of done in spite of what most Republican lawmakers have wanted to see happen, with the exception of Jamie Callender from Northeast Ohio, who's been an advocate for safe and legal marijuana and making sure that there are regulations in place and that there's revenue being generated.
It's pretty clear that this is something that was derived from the populace and not from the legislature.
Right. And like you said earlier, that's the kind of thing that we've seen, that voters have said, we want this, and lawmakers aren't listening. And so they've joined up with groups that have gone to the ballot to make it happen.
I think we're going to talk about another of those issues in just a little bit. For now, though, before we take our first break of the show, the Ohio Redistricting Commission redrew the state's congressional district maps in 2025 because the map adopted in 2022 did not have bipartisan support, meaning it had to be redrawn instead of being in place for a decade. The new map gives Republicans an edge in 12 of Ohio's 15 districts. The current map delivered 10 seats to Republicans, but this new one did get bipartisan support on the commission because Democrats said they feared if they opposed it and it went to the full legislature, the map would be even more lopsided in favor of Republicans. Karen, where does this map that'll be used in this year's midterms give Republicans an edge where currently a Democrat holds the seat?
Yeah, we actually heard from Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio and House Minority Leader Dunny Isaacson that they had seen a map that was going to be worse. And so they felt that this was the map they had to agree to. And what this map does is it tips the district that Marcy Kaptur now represents in the Toledo area and Greg Landsman in the Cincinnati area toward Republicans, but it also tips the Akron area district, now represented by Amelia Sykes, toward Democrats.
More toward Democrats.
Yes, exactly. So you end up with, I think Democrats are hoping for the best scenario for them at this point would be the status quo, 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And they're hoping that the midterms, where Democrats are expected to do well, will allow them to hold that. This map stays in place until 2032. And so we'll just have to see what happens. There have been no lawsuits over this yet. I say yet because there's always that possibility. But for right now, this is what Democrats felt like was the best deal they could get. And Republicans say this is what they feel is fair.
And Joe, there was a lot of criticism over lack of transparency for this. There wasn't a lot of public input.
Yeah, and that was the big thing, Mike. It was the process that really got people going, because they felt like a lot of the Democrats and people who opposed the map felt like they didn't really get to weigh in on it. The map was introduced 2 days before they passed it. There weren't the opportunities for public hearings on it. And, they really felt like everything was done behind closed doors without their input, and they felt like that was against the spirit of the Constitution.
All right, we're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we're going to talk about more of the top State House stories from 2025, including changes to energy policy. This is the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable. I'm Mike McIntyre, and we'll be right back. You are back with the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre with our entire State House News Bureau team, including Bureau Chief Karen Kassler, who's with me in studio, and reporters Joe Ingles and Sarah Donaldson in Columbus. A bit later, we'll welcome Claire Roth, managing editor of the Ohio Newsroom. We're taking a look back today at the top State House stories from 2025. And before we get back to the roundtable, we encourage you to take our year-end version of the IdeaStream News Quiz. It'll test your recall on some of the top local State House stories of the last year. You'll find it at ideastream.org/quiz. And if you do it after this show, you're going to have all the answers. The months-long negotiation over Ohio's new 2-year operating budget dominated the work of lawmakers for the first half of 2025. In the end, lawmakers handed off to the governor a $60 billion spending plan that flattens the state income tax, restricts the kinds of levies schools can ask voters to approve, and changes the funding formula for libraries, eliminating the set percentage they received each year. It's a big document, though. It's a ton more than that. Sarah, when we say this budget flattens the state income tax, which I think was the headline, we mean what exactly, and how will it impact Ohioans?
Yeah, so for every Ohioan who makes more than $26,000, there's two income tax brackets right now. So there's those people in that $26,000 to over like about six-figure bracket. They're at 2.75%. And then everyone over six figures or about six figures and over, they're at 3.5% income tax rate. So by tax year 2026, everyone's going to be at that 2.75% rate. So essentially, it affects Ohioans who make more than six figures the most. It's going to save them and cost Ohio more than $1 billion across the 2-year tax cycle, according to legislative analysis. But Republican lawmakers argue that it helps everyone. It's kind of a trickle-down effect because they say that by cutting taxes for these folks making over six figures, those folks are going to then reinvest that money back into the state of Ohio.
Karen, then there's been this push we talked about earlier to eliminate the state income tax. Does this sort of delay that because we now have a flat tax, or is that the next step, and is it coming soon?
Well, it's one step that a lot of Republican lawmakers wanted to see happen. And when you talk about this push to eliminate Ohio's income tax, it goes back 20 years to former Governor John Kasich. He's the one that first kind of pushed toward this, even though you saw some income tax cuts under former Governor Bob Taft. But there's an analysis from the researchers who do work for state lawmakers that show that income tax cuts have taken $71.9 billion out of Ohio's economy in the last 20 years. Now, Republicans will say that income tax cuts have created jobs and spurred economic development. But you look at that $72 billion and you think, what could the state have done with that money if it had had that money? So, it's a balancing act all the way around, but it's a really big talking point for Republicans that if people get to, as they put it, keep more of their money, then that will spur on economic development. It will allow businesses to reinvest in their businesses, create more jobs, that sort of thing. We haven't, there's some real questions about whether that's been a payoff or not.
You mentioned John Kasich. I wonder what he's up to, because I've been watching social media videos where he gets on and essentially criticizes President Trump without using his name, but still doing those kinds of things. He's trying to keep himself in front of the public. Just things that make you go,
Yes, he's a paid commentator, I think, now for MS Now, as used to be MSNBC. And yeah, I think his popularity, and similar to Governor Mike DeWine in a way, really changed when the state became more aligned with Trump and state lawmakers became a lot more aligned with Trump. That kind of set Kasich and now DeWine a little bit further to the side.
Back to the budget, Joe, school funding is always top of mind in budget cycles. How did schools fare in this budget, separate from the property tax changes we discussed earlier?
Well, it basically was overhauled. The whole public school funding part was overall, and it dictates the amount of collected property taxes that the districts can use as carryover balances before property taxes would be refunded, and that's in House Bill 96. The House and Senate, we went into it with that. The House and Senate met halfway. They said, okay, school districts, you can hold over at 40%, but no more, you get penalized after that. The budget kind of increases the money that also can be put toward private school vouchers so that everyone who attends a private school in Ohio can get an educational voucher. And there was also the establishment of this educational savings account that's out there for students that go to a private school that didn't qualify for the other money. It's a very complicated thing, Mike. I can't explain it in 30 seconds, but there was a lot of push for private schools. They all got something. And the public schools, basically the message was you can't save too much money.
Well, that idea of the cap, which DeWine vetoed, and it has not come back yet, but that idea really came out of the blue. I mean, that was something that schools had been bracing for some sort of action when it came to property taxes because of what we talked about in the previous segment about how people are upset about property taxes. But this idea of capping the amount of money that a district can hold in its reserve as a percentage of its operating budget, that came completely out of nowhere. And so schools have said that is potentially really, really damaging. We haven't seen that come back. And in fact, DeWine's tax group said they did not support that. But it shows where Republicans are when it comes to they want schools to be more transparent about the money that they're holding back and why they're holding it back. But it would have been chaotic if that had happened.
And you're right, Joe. We can't get to all of that on a show, but
Right.
luckily, this is a retrospective. And each and every day on the Sound of Ideas, Stephanie Haney digs into these things for an hour. So we've covered it. We'll continue to cover it, but we're hitting the high points now. One of the other high points, Sarah, is library funding. That changed. It used to be where you got a set percentage of the budget, and that was theirs. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah, so DeWine actually wanted to increase that percentage to give them even more in his budget proposal, but lawmakers set aside $990 million for libraries over 2 years as a line item. And the reason that libraries said this was concerning was because when you have that set percentage, it kind of goes up or down based on, obviously, the money that the state has in that biennium, but they have to go back and fight for their funding every 2 years now, like everybody else, essentially.
And on that fight every 2 years, in all of the uproar about property taxes, at the end of the year, 90% of library levies passed with an average of 63%. And actually 65.5% of school levies passed. And so it's really interesting to note that while people are upset about their property taxes, people are still voting to fund schools and libraries and these sorts of things because they like them.
Tell that to Parma.
Well, not all of them, of course, but.
Let's hit another high point in the budget, or some people believe a low point. $600 million will be going to the Cleveland Browns for their new Brook Park facility, part of a sports stadium fund that was created out of unclaimed funds.
It is a transformational multi-use facility and development, according to...
That's what I meant.
Yes. It's not the Browns Stadium, though that's what it is. It's the Browns domed stadium in Brook Park. And this is the budget. There had been talk throughout this budget process that the state was going to give the Browns something for this stadium. And it ended up being these unclaimed funds. State's holding about $4.8 billion in unclaimed funds. So January 1st, the first transfer of about $1.7 to $1.9 billion is going to go into this fund, from which $600 million will go to the Haslams. And, Democrats and even some Republicans have said they have a real question about this money going to billionaires, a private entity, but Republicans have relied on the idea that this is an economic development project, that it's going to bring back much more than it's going to cost, and the Browns do have to pay it back.
Karen, I know that already sometimes listening to you, it sounds like I'm listening at 2 times speed.
I know.
But I'd like it to be 4 times now because we are running out of time and we got a few more topics. So same with Sarah and Joe, too. Let's hit these ones quickly if we can. Can Ohio produce enough power to keep up with demands from both consumers and data centers? That was a big issue in 2025. And the governor signed House Bill 15 in May addressing power generation and grid reliability. Sarah, this bill went through a lot of changes. In the end, it had near unanimous backing from both parties. An extensive bill, part of it addresses vestiges of the scandal-plagued HB6. How does it do that?
Yeah, so there were 2 direct subsidies that Ohio Valley Electric Cooperative was getting for 2 of its coal-fired power plants, one of which was in Indiana. It also eliminates direct subsidies to some solar farms. Lawmakers said they just feel that they shouldn't be subsidizing individual industries. Another interesting piece of this legislation that I want to add is it expands what's called behind-the-meter generation. So I think that this is something we're going to be looking forward at, which I know this is retrospective. But in 2026, and in future years, when we've got data centers saying they want to come here, this bill allows data centers to set up their own energy generation that goes right to them instead of connecting to the grid.
Now, what about fracking in state parks? That was early 2025. Have they been a boon financially?
So I have not followed it super closely. I know that there was a lot of money that was kind of piling up in fracking royalties that has now kind of been used to subsidize ODNR's budget line, which is really interesting because instead of getting general tax revenue money, the fracking money is kind of subsidizing ODNR's budget. But I mean, the royalties have been kind of stacking up and they had not been dispersed up until this budget was signed.
About $30 million in royalties. And it's interesting to think about how that money is coming from fracking in state parks to state parks, where you have a lot of people who are opposed to this saying, hey, I don't like this idea.
I believe it's actually going directly to Andy Chow.
He who is now at the park system, yes.
All right, it's not really, but hello, Andy, we miss you. All right, Ohio voters approved an amendment to the state constitution in place since 2023, protecting abortion rights and reproductive health. That doesn't mean lawmakers opposed to abortion were going to halt their efforts to limit it. Last year, they continued to introduce legislation that opponents say conflicts with the voter-approved amendment. Joe, a bill requiring a 24-hour waiting period, for example, was introduced in June. The state's existing waiting period law is under legal review. Supporters say this bill is different because it's really about medically informed consent. So let's talk about what is the difference?
Well, the difference is they don't really specifically mention abortion, but abortion is the one that's the procedure that's most affected by this. The lawmakers are trying to skirt around some of these abortion limitations. And by doing it, they're trying to extend it to other procedures or other rules. And so that's where that went. It could, the sponsor of that bill used back surgery as a comparable thing. But of course, if you have back surgery, you're probably going to have a lot of things that are going to get you to that point before you actually have back surgery. You just don't go in and say, oh, my back hurts, I want back surgery tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. So, that's what the advocates of abortion say, that doesn't really fit. And there really isn't another fit except abortion in some of these rules.
There was another proposal that even the abortion opponents and even Right to Life, President Mike Gonidakis was quoted on this, that would treat abortion like homicide. That went too far for them.
Yeah, that goes too far for them. And you got to remember that abortion is one of those things that even people who are opposed to abortion have varied points of view on it. For example, if you look at fertilization of an egg, and you look at how do you look at what is it called? I'm forgetting the name of the procedure to get pregnant.
In vitro?
Yeah.
In vitro, that's it. Sorry, guys.
That's one of the procedures for getting pregnant. There are others.
Yeah, but in vitro fertilization, if you look at that procedure, there are some religions that do not like that idea because it would destroy, depending on how it's done, would destroy an embryo. So, even people who are on that anti-abortion side, some things just go too far, and that's a case of that.
All right, we can't end this segment without talking about what's coming up in 2026 with races from the governor's seat with no incumbent to the Senate seat that will likely break fundraising records again. Midterms are coming up. So let's talk a little bit about that. Karen, we have the Trump-endorsed candidate for the Republican side in Vivek Ramaswamy. We have the former health director, Amy Acton. What's that battle going to be like?
Well, that's interesting. You say Trump endorsed, but not at this moment DeWine endorsed by a lot of other Republicans, but not DeWine.
Does
DeWine
that matter
says,
in Ohio still?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that's one of this is an interesting race for him because he has said he fully expects to endorse the Republican candidate for governor, but his former health director is the Democratic candidate for governor. So I think that this is going to be a very interesting race. The fact that Tim Ryan, the Democratic former congressman, has stepped out of that race possibly, and that Jim Tressel, who is the lieutenant governor, who I have to say, looking back on last year, 2025, that was one of the biggest stories when it happened, that Jim Tressel, the former Ohio State football coach, becomes our lieutenant governor. He decided not to run. That sets up this really interesting battle of two outsiders who both want to be these chief executive of Ohio.
And Dave Yost was pushed out.
And Dave Yost, the attorney general, was pushed out when in previous Republican years, they would have looked at him as being the heir apparent, somebody who wanted to run for governor for a long time, and he's not on the ticket.
Last thing, and that is the Senate race. Sherrod Brown, the Democrat, former senator, he's jumped back into the race. He's going to run against the appointed John Husted, former lieutenant governor. That's going to be an expensive race.
Yes, it is. And I think for a lot of people, they thought maybe it would be switched, that maybe it would be Vivek that would be running, Vivek Ramaswamy running for Senate and John Husted running for governor. That's not what happened. And so you have Sherrod Brown, having been defeated in 2024 by Bernie Moreno, now jumping back in, trying to regain a position in the Senate. It's going to be a very expensive race and high profile because of those two candidates who are there.
Okay, Claire Roth is waiting in the wings, so we're going to have her come on in just a minute. Want to preserve some time for her, so let's do this one quadruple time, maybe quintuple time, and that is what is going to be on your radar coming up in the next year? Start with you, Karen.
I think property taxes. I think taxation in general, but property taxes in particular, because of this abolishment effort, it's going to be a lot of discussion, and lawmakers really need to make some decisions about voters who are very frustrated with what they're seeing in those property tax bills.
All right. And Joe, what are you looking for?
School funding, I'll be looking at that. Also, the property tax piece that Karen's talking about, I think that goes hand in hand. Can't look at one without the other. I'll also be watching bills in the legislature that would make it tougher to get abortions, and looking at the candidates and how the Ohio Democratic Party kind of appeals to voters or tries to appeal to voters in this next year. They've got a lot of rebuilding to do, and I'm anxious to see how that happens.
And Sarah, what's on your radar?
Yeah, there's a bill that bans quote unquote foreign adversaries from buying property. There are a lot of folks, specifically Chinese immigrants, who say that it is targeting them directly. So there's been a lot of debate over this. It's a priority for Republicans to get passed in the new year. So we'll see if they get it done. Okay,
and I'll be looking at whether Ohio State wins the national championship in football. That's on my radar.
I'd put my money on that, but
right.
Not that we would encourage sports gambling, because
no money. All right, thank you to you, Karen. Really good to talk with you, and great to have you in studio.
Happy 2026.
Same to you, and thank you very much as well, Sarah Donaldson and Joe Ingles. Appreciate both of you being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to talk.
All right. And time now for us to take another quick break. Ahead, we're going to check with the Ohio Newsroom's managing editor, Claire Roth, about stories that are richly reported across the state and that resonated here in Northeast Ohio. It's the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable. I'm Mike McIntyre. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre. Thank you for staying with us for this look back on the biggest statewide stories of 2025. The Ohio Newsroom, a statewide collaborative of the state's public media organizations, including IdeaStream, which administers it, marked the second anniversary of its flagship daily reporting project in 2025. You hear the daily Today from the Ohio Newsroom features here on WKSU. You find them online at ideastream.org and in our newsletter, The Daily Frequency. The Ohio Newsroom team has now been to nearly every county in the state, and in 2025 produced more than 230 stories, including the kind that stick with you for months. Managing editor Claire Roth joins me now to talk about some of the stories that resonated here and the work that has come in 2025 and will be coming in 2026. Claire, we went through our web stats, came up with some of the stories that people gravitated toward this year on our website. And let's talk about some of those highlights to end our year and look back on 2025. One of the news stories that was read the most had to do with foreign ownership of Ohio farmland, which is something that Sarah just mentioned before our break. Can you talk a little bit about the reporting on that?
Yeah, so 2,500 acres in Ohio were purchased by foreign folks from 2022 to 2023. And so that accounts for, when you add it all up, not just from that time period, it's more than 500,000 acres are owned by foreign landowners. And it's interesting because we are actually less than the national average in that regard. And we talked to the Farm Bureau. No one on that list is really adversarial, the way that Sarah was talking about just now.
Yeah.
But it does really show these kind of macro trends that are happening. A huge reason behind those purchases was renewable energy type farms. Small countries like Belgium have big agriculture and they want to hit their carbon offset goals and they simply don't have the land for it. So the number one country that owns land or purchased land in that time period here was actually Denmark, which is not what you would expect.
Now, another story you guys did that made me pick up the bass guitar I don't actually own and can't play was how Dayton became the funk capital of the world. Is it the funk capital of the world?
I mean, it's definitely the nerve center for funk, and you see those roots still play out today, even though funk is not, at its peak the way that it was in the 70s. And there's really two big factors that led to that. One was, of course, the Great Migration meant that a lot of Black Americans moved to Southwest Ohio, to Dayton in the mid-20th century. There were jobs there. And then so that kind of set the scene, set the stage. But then in 1973, a band you've probably heard of, the Ohio Players, was
yeah.
in Dayton. They're most famous for Love Roller Coaster, right? Roller Coaster, that
Love,
one.
love.
But they had a smash hit with what was called The Funky Worm. And that just, it kicked off a whole wave of hits from other bands in the area. And it really gained prominence. And those roots, that music is such a part of that city even today.
What a great story, and what a cool project, too, because you had some students working with you on that.
Yeah, that was part of the America 250 Ohio Commission series that we did about Black excellence throughout the state, which there are so many undertold stories across that. And we actually had student journalists help produce those stories about prominent Black Ohioans throughout history. So we had ones from OSU and from Denison and the University of Cincinnati, and they were traveling all over the state to gather these profiles of historical moments, historical people. So that included a profile of a Northeast Ohioan, Garrett Morgan, the creator of the modern traffic light, and MacArthur genius and multimedia artist Amina Robinson. I worked with those students, and it was so cool to see them gain those skills and really dig into these stories from Ohio history, and then to see them resonate so much with listeners.
And Garrett Morgan, not only the traffic light, but also the gas mask. Pretty amazing.
Very critical. Yeah, very true. Very true.
You looked into this little-known Ohio aviation history moment in the Buckeye Skies series that you did, and it led to a feature on the USS Shenandoah, its crash in Noble County. I was fascinated by this. There's a lady that has a trailer with all kinds of debris and trinkets and other things as a result of this, but it is really part of the identity of the town there.
I loved that story. Kendall Crawford's brainchild, that one. This naval airship, fell into the farm fields of Noble County. And as she was reporting that story, people pointed out they had hardly seen an automobile at that time in that region of Ohio. And so it crashes there. And not only did local residents, help save some lives from that crashed airship, but then they kind of became scavengers. And almost everyone in this tiny town has something that's been passed down from generation to generation that they scavenged from that, crashed airship. And so this one woman, she married into a family that owned the land near where the airship had crashed, and they decided to make a little museum. And so Kendall took these wonderful photos of, broken compasses and all of these things that had been scavenged from that more than 100 years ago. And my favorite detail from that story is the fact that the high school mascot is literally the Zeps because of that, because that's how deeply that moment has become ingrained in the town's culture.
Your mascot is a crashed airship.
Hey, we do the best we can. I was the Dowling Catholic Maroons from my high school, so I would say I'd rather be the Zeps instead of a color of the bishop's robes.
Probably good. Last thing, we just got a quick minute for this, but potato chips are big in Ohio. Who knew?
Oh, huge. It was a very greasy reporting day for Kendall Crawford, that one. But yeah, first ever potato chip factory in America, started in a Cleveland kitchen. And then an Ohio resident also started a trade organization that lobbied Congress in mid-World War II to have those potato chips declared, quote unquote, an essential food group. So they then got extra gasoline rations. And, some people say it basically saved the industry. But to this day, we have so many different potato chip factories. We're second in the nation, even though we don't grow many of them. And so Grippo's, Ballreich's, there's so many different types of potato chips that are made right here in the Buckeye State.
I hadn't had Grippo's until you sent them to us as part of the Ohio Newsroom's annual meeting, so we could all have chips while we had a virtual meeting, and they were really good.
You're welcome. I can't believe,
thank
I'm
you.
so happy I got to introduce you to those. Those are actually my personal favorite. I love Grippo's barbecue chips.
All right, and real quickly, 32 of Ohio's counties are considered part of the region known as Appalachia. Those counties basically hug the eastern boundary of the state. We're on the western edge of the ancient mountain range and sit along the Ohio River to the south. Your team now is going to be focusing on that region in the year ahead. How so?
So exciting. We are hiring a dedicated Appalachian reporter, and they are hyper-focused for half of their jobs on a 5-county region: Monroe, Guernsey, Noble, Harrison, and one other that's escaping me right now. and Morgan, there we go. And then they're also going to be spending time going all over those 32 counties to report, classic Ohio newsroom stories like the ones that we just talked about from all over that region.
Awesome.
There's such a great culture there. There's so much to delve into. It does not have as many news organizations as it deserves as a region, and we're really excited to be part of that solution.
Well, you've done a great job of that in the spaces in between, and now you're going to be doing a great job of that in Appalachia as well. And I really appreciate you being with us, and congratulations on the success of the Ohio Newsroom.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, and that wraps up our show for today. My thanks to you, Claire Roth.